Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we're talking about one of my favorite topics ever, which is autonomy and well-being, thriving in the single lifestyle. I'm sure if you're clicking on this podcast, chances are you're single right now. I mean, for the longest time, I was always the single person in my friends group, and I just love that. I embrace this so much. And a lot of people give me a lot of weird things about it. And, I was just kind of like, you know what, you can say whatever you want. And family pressure is a very big deal, especially with an Asian background like myself. But I think it's actually more and more important to talk about this topic nowadays. I probably have not resonated with a topic more than this one on the show. So you can clearly sense my excitement. And I'm excited to talk to our guest today about it. I would love to introduce her to everyone. Bella DePaulo, PhD, Harvard University, has always been single and always will be. The Atlantic calls her America's foremost thinker and writer on the single experience. She is the author of Single at Heart, The Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. Her TEDx talk, What No One Ever Told You About People Who Are Single, has been viewed more than 1.7 million times. You can learn more about her at her website, www.belladepalo.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bella. How are
Thank
you?
you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love talking about this too, so I'm happy that you're excited.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited about this topic. When I saw the agenda, I was kind of like, first of all, let me talk about this topic. And second of all, I get to talk to Bella about it, who is the expert
Yes.
on the topic. I really love it. And, I think it's just something that we need to embrace more and more. Um, I really love this topic because, as I mentioned briefly in the introduction of the conversation, a lot of people have this misconception, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with this, is that single people are broken. And I'm like, no, we are a full person. Like each of us is a
Yes.
full person. Excuse
Exactly.
me?
And you know what people say when they want to introduce you to a partner so you can be whole again, that they're going to fix you up like you're broken.
Yeah,
No. so my
exactly.
so
Yes.
my recent thing and what I really am excited about is that book that you mentioned, Single at Heart, The Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. And in that
Yeah.
book, I talk about people who are what I call single at heart. And they're people who love being single. They want to stay single. They're happy and flourishing because they are single, not
Yeah.
in spite of it.
Yes.
So, trying to fix them by making them coupled would actually ruin their lives.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I love that. I'm very curious though, because obviously you wrote a whole book on it. You've got a
Yeah.
TEDx talk about it. It's pretty
hmm
much your life work to talk about singlehood.
Yes.
So why this topic, and how did you get here in your career? I'm sure a lot must have happened.
Oh, yeah. So, um, you know, I never wanted to get married. And for the longest time, I thought that I was just slow, that I would get to it later than everyone else. I thought like wanting to get married was kind of like getting bitten by a bug. And I hadn't gotten bitten yet. And I don't know when it was that I realized that there was no like one aha moment, but sometime in my 30s, I think I realized I am never going to want that. Single is who I really am. And once I understood that, it was just such a wonderful thing because I could fully invest in my single life. I wasn't thinking to myself, well, maybe I'll get bitten by this marriage bug. And then, if I buy a house, I want to buy it with somebody else and I want to coordinate my life around someone else. But I never wanted to do that. And I have now talked to all sorts of people all around the world who feel the same way, but who have never been validated before. So they have heard the story you started out with, that this idea people have that single people are somehow broken. And that makes them feel, defensive, and it makes them feel lacking in confidence in their own life. And so I sometimes get people who email me or who write to advice columnists, and they'll say things like, I love my single life. I like my solitude. I like hanging out with my friends. I have, interests that I love. I have passions I like. And they'll talk about all the things they love about their life. And then they'll say, but I wonder, is there something wrong with me because I don't want to be in a committed romantic couple? Well, how bizarre is that? That people who have what we all want, a life that we love, are made to feel insecure about whether there's something wrong with them. So that is one of the reasons I really wanted to write this book, to let people know if you are single, you love being single, you want to stay single, be proud of yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, you're doing great.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I love that, and picking up right on what you were talking about, like, is there something wrong with me that I'm single? That's actually a comment that a lot of people just throw around. I remember in this conversation I had with my extended family when I was visiting them, for the end of the year celebration. Someone was kind of saying, talking about their own son, and they're like, is there something wrong with him? Like, he's still single. And in my head, immediately I went, first of all, that's your son you're talking about. And second of all, there's nothing wrong about it, but they're not open to listening to these things. So it's a discussion that I'd rather not have. But for those that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure they're open minded enough to know what this is all about. So we're going to talk about it soon. Before we get there, let's get to know you a bit better first, Bella. So we've got a section called Have You Met Bella? We're going to get to know you through some of your favorite things. So I know you're a book author, but I wonder which book is your favorite.
Okay, I'm not going to try to mention an absolute favorite, but I read a lot of books about single people or by single people, and one of my favorites in that is called No Thanks, Black, Female, and Living in the Martyr-Free Zone by Keturah Kendrick. And what I loved about her book is she was probably the first person I found writing a somewhat memoiristic kind of book about her single life, totally unapologetic. And she just owns who she is. She's single, she doesn't have kids, and she is not going to try to apologize to you for it. And that might not sound like a big deal, but I read half a dozen or more memoirs before that by single people. And they're kind of like, well, yeah, I like being single, but you never know. Or they live for 40 years before they realize that, single is good. I thought it was just bad. And this is just such a more enlightened perspective. So I was just delighted to find that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely love that. It's really on point with our topic today as well. Thank you for sharing. So which movie have you been enjoying recently?
Well, I'll tell you about, it's not a movie, but a TV series, and it's called The Bear. And it's about this top chef who's in a very, fancy, esteemed restaurant that he owns and runs. And his brother dies by suicide, and he comes home to run the little sandwich shop that his brother has. And it turns out to be this series about loving what you do. So he has this assistant chef and the people around him, but he and his assistant chef especially are just passionate about what they do. So when they have free time, which, as you know, in a small business, a little restaurant, there's almost none, but they get together and they talk about recipes and they try out new things. They just love what they're doing. And it's about friendship, how these two people bond and how the people in the restaurant bond. And to me, it's just so refreshing and engaging to see a whole great, beautifully produced series that's not about romance, where it doesn't build up to, some wedding, but
Yeah.
instead it shows that people can be passionate about what they do. And, the thing that I've learned all these years of studying single people and what the kinds of things that are said to them is that no matter what you do, if you're single, there's a way people can dismiss you. So if you say, like I do, I love my work. I mean, my work is writing about, researching, talking about single people. And people will say, oh, well, you're married to your job or your job won't love you back. But yeah, actually it does.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a beautiful thing that you share about that show because it sounds like something completely different from what we normally see. I've actually never heard of that show before, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, cool. So I'm not sure if you're a podcast listener yourself, even though you're our podcast guest today. If you are, which show do you enjoy the most?
Well, I've done many podcasts as I talk about my book, Single at Heart. And my favorite one, although I've enjoyed so many of them, but my favorite is probably the one called Spinsterhood Reimagined, and it's by Lucy Megason, who's in London, and she just gets it about what it means to be single at heart, and it's
Yeah.
so much fun when somebody really gets it. Although it's also interesting when I talk to someone who starts out not getting it, and over time they do. And
Yeah.
that's really exciting too.
Yeah. Beautiful. It's again something that is very on brand with today's topic. Thank you so much
Okay.
for sharing that.
Okay.
So I wonder if you've got a role model in life, or perhaps many role models, and if so, who are they?
Instead of talking to you about a role model, which I usually think of as somebody older than me, and I'm 70, um, I want to tell you about someone I really admire, and she's much younger. Her name is Ketaki Chokani. She's an Indian social scientist, and she is just a brilliant young scholar who is bringing the study of single people into its own. Um, she, along with Craig Wynne, organized the first global singles studies conference. She and Craig edited a book of scholarly writings about singlehood. She's working on starting an academic journal devoted to the study of single people. And her scholarship and investment and energy that she devotes to this is going to help so many of us now and into the future. And she has other areas of scholarly expertise too. I don't know how she does it. And she's also a musician, an artist, a bird watcher. So she's like this completely well-rounded person. And she's kind and thoughtful and generous. And I've never met her except online.
Aw.
So she is like my hope for the future of what I've been calling singlehood studies, which
Yeah.
I should probably say a word about too, because, when I first started doing this about 3 decades ago, there was hardly anyone who identified as a scholar of single people. Instead, there were like hundreds and hundreds of people who study marriage or romantic relationships or conventional family. And it is only in the last couple of years that people are starting to self identify as scholars of singlehood. And we're creating groups like the Singlehood Studies group of scholars and so forth, which Keita Hikiki is doing too. So it's just getting on the map, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting indeed. Thank you for sharing about that. Yeah, it's the fun news for all the single people or people that are embracing being single at heart, just like your book saying. Okay, finally, in this part, I would love to ask you about a course you've taken. I'm sure you've taken many over the years, and I wonder which one is the one that is most influential to you.
Well, I haven't taken a course in 45 years, but I've been teaching courses, and my favorite course to teach is, you will not be surprised, a course on singles in society and in science. And I first taught that many, many years ago at the University of Virginia. I'm now at the University of California at Santa Barbara as a research affiliate. But at the University of Virginia, I taught what was supposed to be a graduate seminar on that topic. But then an undergraduate really wanted to take it. And so she begged me, and I said, of course. And so she was really great. And, we talked about how to think about single people in a way that wasn't about, oh, you poor thing, there's something wrong with you. And it was just so, I think for them and for me, it was just so enlightening and expansive and exciting to think about single people in positive ways and to show how the research actually supports that in ways that aren't self evident because of the ways that studies are reported in the media.
Yeah, well, very nice to hear, and thank you for sharing that. So today we will not be able to learn your whole course, but we'll probably, learn a new thing or two on this topic. So let's get started and let's talk about autonomy and well-being. I think a lot of people struggle with this, right? Especially we debunked a misconception straight off the bat when you started the conversation about the fact that a lot of people think that single people are broken or there's something wrong with them, which ties right into well-being. I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that we can agree on. Kind of jumped the gun there a little bit, but I feel like today's conversation is exactly about that. But I wonder how you view well-being yourself, Bella.
Yeah, so well-being is most often associated with happiness, and that's part of it. But it's deeper too. It's also about having a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. Another component of well-being is being healthy, and that's important too. And it's not just physical health; it's also mental health. And I think that you can have health problems and still maintain a sense of well being in your life. So you can be doing as well as can be expected or better, considering what you're dealing with. You can feel badly about being sick while still feeling good about yourself.
Yeah, I really love that. I think it's a wholesome definition and quite, similar to what we've heard on the show so far. And I especially love the part where you talked about the fact that, you could be having some sort of health problems, but you can still maintain a sense of well-being in your life. That's so important, right? Because a lot of people are kind of saying, oh, because I'm going through this, I don't have a sense of well-being in my life, which is not true. It's actually the complete opposite. When you have, I think, when you have a problem, whether it be with your physical health, your mental health, that's when you appreciate your well-being the most and you can nurture it even more, because now you know what to work on, how to carry yourself, and you understand your body better and yourself better, and that's so important. And that goes straight to the conversation today about being single and all the misconceptions people get. So one of the things about well-being and single, and I just really want to relate it because, like, again, like, it's such a big deal. A lot of people give me I don't want to call names here, but like gonna give me really not great stuff about it. And I just think it's so unfair to just say single people do not have a good sense of well-being. In fact, on this show about a few weeks ago, I learned that uh but probably the happiness show, actually, apologies. I learned that when you're in a relationship initially, your level of happiness and well-being might increase, but after a certain stage, it kind of plateaus us, and sometimes it's even lower than a single person's level of happiness and well-being. I might not be quoting this entirely right, but that's kind of the basic idea of it. And I think that was so interesting for me to hear, because it was the first time that I heard it, obviously, and also I think the first time anyone in our audience has heard it as well. So yeah, 'cause this is all about learning. So what do you think some of the other misconceptions that people have about well-being? Like, this could be related to
Yeah,
singlehood, or it could be just
right.
related to well-being in general.
Yeah. Well, let me go back and expand on what you just said because it's so important. So people think, oh, if you want to really be happy and healthy, what you should do is get married or at least get into a committed romantic relationship. Well, now there are more than as of 2012, there were already 18 big studies following people for years and years. And every year they asked them, how happy are you? How happy are you? And are you single? Are you married? Etc. And what they find in these studies is then when people first approach the day of their wedding, people who get married, early on, maybe in that first year or so, they get a little bit happier. It's like a honeymoon effect. They just got married, everybody's cheering for them, they have this big party, but then over time they become they lose some of that happiness and they go back to being as happy or as unhappy as they were when they were single. And that little honeymoon effect they got, that little zone of happiness, the only people who experience it are the people who get married and stay married. The people who are headed to divorce are actually already becoming a little less happy as they approach their wedding day. And there are also studies of health which show that, and these are in several different nations, and again, big studies, nationally representative, and show that when people get married, sometimes their health actually decreases a little bit by their own self reports. So it's absolutely not true that if you want to be happier and healthier, the royal route to that is through marriage. Now, all studies are always averages, so there are always exceptions. There are going to be some people who get married and really do become happier and healthier and stay that way. But on average, that's not what happens.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's very insightful and interesting to hear, especially for our audience. And I actually realized that because the topic of your book is single at heart. I'm sure it's not just about single people. It might be people that are, probably even married, but would like to embrace the singlehood at heart that they have. Because sometimes this is what I heard from my married friends. Like, sometimes you lose your sense of self a little bit,
Yes,
or
yes,
maybe a lot, and you
absolutely.
kind of have to
Right.
find your way back there.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and that was kind of like when I hear these conversations, and of course these are people that are really open and honest about it. Other people are probably just sugarcoating it because obviously they wouldn't want to say, yeah, I probably was happier when I was single. Like, they probably wouldn't say that.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it sheds some light here, because
Hmm.
that, I think, is probably one of the biggest misconceptions as well, because like you're pointing out, there's so many studies on this topic. It's just that we don't talk about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah.
And and then what we hear is often wrong, that, it's the people who get married who are better off. And so we're misled by that. And I think that's why so many people who are single and love their single lives and are happily single doubt themselves because they keep seeing these misleading headlines saying, oh, if you really want to be truly happy, you have to get married. Well, no, 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 not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, I mean, what if you get married to someone that's going to make your life miserable?
Yeah, right. And for the single at heart, people who are powerfully drawn to single life, even a great partner is not going to improve their lives. In fact, of the many stories I've heard from people who are single at heart, some of the most compelling ones came from people who found the one. They found somebody they loved and who loved them. In some cases, they got engaged. And yet they didn't feel good about it. One woman was telling me her story, and she said, she got engaged, and somehow she never got into being excited about the wedding or wanting to plan it. And she told the man she was engaged to, that she had reservations. She wanted to travel, she wanted to do all these things. And he said, well, we can do those things. We can do them together. We can even do them if we have kids. But what she said to me was, that's not what I want. I want to travel on my own. I want to have my own life. And so she broke off the engagement, and she's stayed single ever since. And what I think is important about that is, as I talk about this idea of being single at heart, a lot of people will say, oh, you just haven't found the right person. You're just fooling yourself. Well, here are people who have found the right person. And it doesn't work. One person said, it's like trying to wear an uncomfortable pair of shoes. It's just never going to feel right. Of course, it's worse
Yeah.
than that because it's your whole life, not just your
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's each to their own. It's not something that we all have to do. This concept of getting married, coupling up, and I do see the beauty of being in love and having a partner, but I also see the beauty of being single and embracing it if that's what works for you, right? So there's just these are just different perspectives of life, and I think it's just unfair to say that one is right and the other is not. Like, saying that, oh, like you got to get married. I actually remember, this is funny because I'm going to expose my own mother because she and I had a conversation not long ago, and she was kind of saying, and I was saying to her, what if I don't want to get married? And she's like, she started freaking out. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. And then she's like, no, you have to.
Oh my gosh.
That's the only thing she could say.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I was like,
Wow.
why do I have
Wow.
to get married? The only thing she
Yeah.
could say is, oh, you have to.
Right.
Everybody
Yeah.
does, like, just like,
Yeah.
just because
So
everyone is doing it, you have to do it. I'm like,
give this to everybody out there. Give single at heart to your parents.
yes, exactly, especially Asian parents.
Yeah.
Just for perspectives, like,
Right.
I'm not
Right.
saying no to that, but I'm saying,
Right.
what if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
It could be a
Yeah.
possibility. Anything could
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And a big factor of that is autonomy. Like, I think for people with my type of personality, and probably for you as well, autonomy is important. We don't want to rely on other people to get things moving sometimes, and it goes beyond that. So how would you define autonomy in the context of singlehood?
Well, it's so important, especially for people who are single at heart and love being single. Living according to their values and who they really are, living authentically is so central. And living authentically for us means we live single and we embrace our single life and we use our freedom within the confines of our resources and opportunities to do what we care about the most, to follow our passions. And that could mean, having adventures, or it could mean caring for the people that you care about the most, or it could mean learning and growing over the course of your life, or creating a home that is really yours, or attending to the people that you care about. I don't just mean caretaking, but also in terms of friendship and being there for other people and having them as part of your life. I like to say that people who are not single at heart have the one, but people who are single have the ones.
Yeah, lovely. I love that. I think it's a new perspective. This is probably the first time a lot of people are hearing about this, because it's just, to them, autonomy doesn't mean, like, it's got to be in the context of singlehood. And I understand it. I think it is important to have autonomy when you're part of a couple as well. But I think, autonomy in the context of singlehood is just so different, because you maintain your sense of identity. And I think that's kind of something that a lot of people struggle with when they're in a relationship or they're getting married or they're already married and they start to like have all these questions. I actually watched this movie, I think, is it Monday? Yeah, yesterday. There's a French movie festival going on, and there's a movie called Anatomy of a Fall. And it was basically that, like this couple got into a fight just because they shred their own identity for each other. So they were compromising, but they resented each other for compromising at the end. And, like I think that's why this understanding autonomy in this context is so important, because once you can embrace that in singlehood, whether you decide to be in a couple or not, you can embrace it and live with your value and not blame the other person once you've started making compromise, which is also important. And I would love to know your perspective though, because today we're here to talk about singlehood. So I digress, but going back to going back to singlehood and autonomy, how do you think this would affect our well-being when we embrace autonomy?
Oh, well, it's wonderful because when you do that, then you can really do what makes your life most meaningful and fulfilling to you instead of trying to live the life that's expected or that other people want you to live or pressure you to live. Um, Let me tell you about this study of more than 200,000 people in more than 30 European nations, and they were asked how much they valued freedom and self expression and creativity. And for both married and single people, the more they valued freedom, the happier they were. The single people valued freedom more than the married people did. And the link between valuing freedom and being happier was stronger for the single people. Single people got more out of their valuing of freedom. And I think the reason for this is because, especially if you're single at heart and you're investing in your single life, you are using your freedom to be the person you really are, to follow your heart and to be true to yourself. I'll give you a personal example. Um, I was on sabbatical in the year 2000, and I moved from the University of Virginia, which is on the east coast of the United States, to the University of California at Santa Barbara, which is on the west coast. It was supposed to be only for a year, but I loved it so much, I decided to stay. And I could do that. I was single. I didn't have to, worry about what would my partner think of that. Would they have to give up their life on the East Coast or their job, or what if I didn't make it financially? Would that put pressure on them? But really, because I never wanted a partner in that way, I didn't even think about things like that. It was just, well, this is what I know is making me happy. I love it out here on the West Coast. I love my colleagues. I love the sunshine. I love nature. I love the fresh produce that's always around, and I love the values of the West Coast. And so I just stayed, even though it was a bit of a risk. I mean, I had my family on the East Coast. I had friendship networks that I had developed over the course of decades, and I would be starting all that from scratch on the West Coast. But it was right for me. And another thing I did at that time, the year 2000, I had expertise in something entirely different. I used to study the psychology of lying and detecting lies. And that
Oh,
was kind of, yeah, it was interesting. But once I made that commitment to move my entire life all the way across the country, I also made the commitment to do what I really loved intellectually, which was studying single people and single life.
yeah. Well, that's such a great anecdote that you shared with us, because I think that's very important to embrace in this context. It just helps to contribute to your well-being, because I know that in the context of couples, it's very different. Whenever you make a decision, it's a joint decision, and you got to be mindful of that. And a lot of the time, there's compromise, there's resentment, unaddressed, and then it kind of manifests and it affects your well-being. And that's a whole different topic in itself. But going back to the singlehood and autonomy, I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast, they have already chosen to be single. They just probably finding their way and navigating through it. And not just those people, but for those that are currently single right now, whether they would be, they would choose to remain single forever, or they would like to eventually one day get into a relationship. I think autonomy in the context of singlehood is so important, yet hard to navigate, because in a way you're kind of like, oh, I get to be my own person. All right, let me learn how to do that. Because for a lot of people, it could be a family thing. I know for a lot of people, they're kind of like, oh yeah, but like I've always got help, before, and like I always got people to rely on, and I don't really know how to handle this autonomy that I have right now. So for those people, how can they cultivate a strong sense of autonomy?
Oh, well, actually, that goes to another um, misperception about single people, which is that on average, they are more connected to more different people. So, um, for this, I can talk to you about big nationally representative surveys in the United States, but I don't think it's specific to the United States, where they find that single people are more likely to stay in touch with friends, family, colleagues, neighbors. They're more likely to exchange help with them, to be there for them, to provide emotional and practical support, to just be in touch with them. Whereas the other studies that I was mentioning to you before that follow people as they go from being single to getting married or just moving in with each other, what they find is when couples move in together or get married, they become more insular. So they talk to their friends less. They stay in touch with their parents less. It's like they have their own little world now. And so the idea that it's single people who don't have anyone or that single people who are alone, on average, the opposite is true, that they have more people and they can spend time with them and tend to them without worrying that a romantic partner is going to think that time belongs to them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sounds like, it sounds like it's on the right trajectory there. It sounds right to me. But I asked that question, and I think part of us formulating that question is also, for a lot of people, they might be struggling to make friends, like as a single person, right? Like you were saying, they're better at keeping in touch, but nurturing this sense of autonomy is not easy, because there are the extroverts out there, there are introverts out there, and then the ambiverts and whatever else you want to call them. I think it's actually hard, because I was single for the longest time, and I remember I was kind of like, oh, like I would love to make friends, oh, especially moving to a foreign country. I was like, how do I make friends? I went to uni, did my master's. I made friends through that, and then after uni, I did some, like, went to a bunch of events and made friends through that. But then after that, it kind of slowed down as I started working, because a lot of my time was dedicated to work, and I feel like that is what a lot of people struggle with, because you can definitely you can definitely thrive as a single person, but you cannot live without other people's help. Like, and this interaction, you probably need help from time to time, and you need to nurture that network and even the connection, not even just help, because it's such a big deal on this well-being show. We know that human connections are very important to our well-being, and it doesn't have to be a partner. It could be multiple friends, or different social groups you're part of. And I think that is actually part of this nurturing our autonomy, because um, for me, I look at it, if I were to zoom out and look at like life as a single person, if you don't actively make friends and stay connected to these people, things will start to happen. Like, your friends will start to couple up, for example. And then, they actually, like you were saying in the studies, they don't keep in touch with you. So you're probably making the effort to stay in touch with them. But the other end is kind of not reciprocated. So there needs to be new friendships, there needs to be new connections, to be autonomy, to have that autonomy and just have your own sense of self and, being able to handle all these different things in a single life. It's definitely really fun, but also quite tricky for some of us.
It can be. And I think part of it is what you mentioned, that, you can develop this great friendship with other single people, but then if they become part of a committed romantic partnership, they demote you. And, you used to see them for dinner. Now you see them for lunch, or maybe you see them hardly at all.
Exactly.
And I think it's part of a bigger issue of valuing romantic partners above everyone else and not valuing friendship enough. So that's something that I see as a whole bigger agenda. We need to change our values so that we don't think about friendship or friends as just friends. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I think single people, while we're in this phase where people who get married end up in a married couples club where where single people are kind of the outsiders, I think it helps for single people to find their people. So, if they find other single people who aren't all obsessed with becoming coupled, and it could even be, being friends with a couple people who aren't scotch taped to their partners so that they have to do everything with them. That can be a thing too. So in 2015, I started this online Facebook group called the Community of Single People. And we talk about everything except what other people expect single people to be obsessed with, dating, or trying to get out of single life. We don't want to unsingle ourselves. So, so in this community of single people, it's now more than 8,000 people from more than 100 countries. And we talk about, so we talk about, our single lives, what we love about them, the challenges. We celebrate each other's, achievements and accomplishments. And we talk about what's been difficult. And it's everything except saying, boo-hoo, I'm single, I want to be married. No, you can't do that. You're not in the group if you do that. And so that has been, I didn't know what it was going to be when I first started it, but it's been important to people because, it's validating, and it's especially important to do that in this cultural context when staying single, wanting to stay single is viewed with suspicion. That there might be something wrong with you. And here we are, a group of 8,000 people from all around the world who like being single. And we don't think there's anything wrong with us. In fact, we're kind of proud of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that for you guys. And so you actually mentioned an interesting point. You guys discussed challenges and how to deal with them. So what would be some of the key challenges that you discuss in the group, and how do you deal with those?
Well, we talk about the way that society, American society and certainly others are set up to accommodate couples. And so, for example, in American medicine, it's very much constructed around the couple. So there might be medical procedures that you have to have someone with you if you're going to have that procedure and they have to drive you back and forth. And they just kind of assume that you're going to have a spouse, right? And instead of that, realizing that a lot of people, they might have lots of friends, but they have lives. They might work during the day, and are you going to really ask them to take a whole day off? And so um, we need to reorganize our medical community in ways that recognize single lives and make it more possible for them to be cared for fully. And it's not just them. You can be married and have a partner who can't drive or who is sick and needs your help and will never reciprocate because they're not going to get better. So that's just one example. But we also talk about the pressures of, other people thinking that there's something wrong with us because we're single, or how maybe the married people in our lives are valued more, or, their achievements are taken more seriously. If they get married, that's a big deal. But if we, get a degree or buy a new house or something like that, or achieve something that's really important to us, that doesn't get the same level of recognition or respect. I mean, there are all sorts of things. And a lot of them are structural. They're societal levels. It's the way people think about single people and coupled people. It's like part of the conventional wisdom, the mythology, the ideology that values marriage and coupling and traditional family. And one of the things I'm trying to do with my Single at Heart book is challenge that and say that we need to let people, give them the freedom, the opportunity to live their most fulfilling and meaningful life. And I see it as part of a bigger project of social justice and personal fulfillment. So it's kind of like, in a way, when people who are not heterosexual did not feel free to be who they really were, and they get married because they get married to a person of the other sex because they thought they should and they had to, and they couldn't be who they really are. Well, it's a similar dynamic with people who love being single, regardless of their gender identity or orientation, that they too feel pressured to live a life that's not theirs. And I want them to feel free to be true to themselves. And it's part of the, gay, straight evolution. It's part of gender. So when women used to be more strongly confined to certain roles and they didn't feel as didn't have as many opportunities to do what they wanted, and they just felt constrained to live a certain kind of life. And that is changing. Of course, it's not fully where it should be yet, but I see the Single at Heart project as part of that whole big social justice and personal authenticity project.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. And it's also heartwarming to hear. Because it's sort of like we've been celebrating singlehood, and we're celebrating being single at heart, but at the same time we have to acknowledge that there are challenges, especially autonomy is great, but it's not always rainbow and sunshine. There's lots to navigate through. And so I'm sure if our audience are listening to at this point, they might start to wonder, all right, I hear you, it's great, and there are going to be challenges along the way for me to get there, to embrace my autonomy. I would love to get to know a practice I can try today. So let's go into our practice part. And so if you were to share your own practice, I'm sure you probably have a few up your sleeves by this point. What would be a practice you would share with our audience in terms of nurturing and embracing their autonomy?
I think it's not so much specific things, but a whole approach. So I have a routine, a kind of set way that I like to organize my life on a day-to-day basis. And so I stay up to the wee hours of the night. My parents told me I did that even when I was an infant, that I stay up all night and slept all day. And then when I get up, I do some work for a few hours, and then I go out, and I usually go for a long walk, maybe do some. Oh, it's a beautiful place to walk here because I'm in Southern California and it's sunshine and ocean and the ocean and beautiful trails. So I do that. Might do some errands, come back, maybe make dinner if I'm not going out to dinner with someone, and then I have some downtime of reading or watching shows or whatever. And then I go back to work for another couple of hours, maybe between 11 and midnight and 4 or 5 in the morning. And so that's my routine. But if it doesn't work, I don't push myself to make it work. So, for example, a key thing for me is writing. I wrote my Singlehood Heart book. I write blogs. I write a lot of different things. And so in those work times, which is early afternoon and then late at night, often what I plan to do is some writing. But if I get into it and it's just not happening, I don't beat myself up about that. I'll just go back to reading or analyzing or doing whatever it is that I want. There's a lot of work things I can do besides writing. And I find that really works for me because if I try to make myself do something when I'm not really into it, I'll just rip up those pages the next day. They're not going to stay. So what's the point? So I think the big message is I have created this everyday life that is really offbeat in a way because it's offbeat hours um, and yet it's so fulfilling for me. Unless I have something to do that I really dread, like a dentist appointment or something. I wake up every day and just so happy to have this day in front of me in which I know I'll be doing work that I love. I'll have time to, go for a walk and be out in the beautiful fresh air and sunshine, that I'll have some downtime, but then I'll have several hours and hours of work time, which to me is not a negative. It's not like, oh, now I have to work, but it's now I get to work because I am so invested in the work that I do.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's not just a practice per se, but it's kind of like a routine. I think what I hear is, you build yourself that routine, and just be really gentle with yourself, right? Because it's important. I think it's actually when you were talking about that and describing your day, I was thinking about the fact that for a lot of us, like whether it be whichever stage in life we're in, there would be a lot of different things happening. And when we actually nurture that routine for ourselves and plan our days and know what we want to do, that is when we're actually cultivating our sense of autonomy. Because along the way, we're going to learn a lot of different things. But yeah, I find that if we go about not having a routine whatsoever, we're just going to feel listless, just like directionless. And that doesn't help.
I think a lot of people experienced that during the pandemic when a lot of structures fell away and you had a lot of unstructured time. A really interesting thing about the lockdowns was that people who were single at heart did well. Some of them
Yeah.
had financial challenges like a lot of us did, but they one thing about single at heart that we didn't get to talk about yet is that we love the time we have to ourselves. So we're not afraid of being alone, of having time to ourselves. In fact, we cherish it. And that's almost like a superpower because if you find the time that you have to yourself relaxing or invigorating or good for productivity or creativity or spirituality or whatever it is that you get out of your time to yourself, then you're very unlikely to feel lonely. And it got us through a pandemic. And it also means that you're probably not ever going to be the caricature of the old person who's isolated and lonely and sad. No, you're going to still appreciate that alone time. And one of the ways that people who are single at heart flourished during the pandemic was that they already had interests and things that they did that did not require another person, like exercising or meditating or gardening or reading, and some of those are things you can do with another person. Like I like to go for long walks with other people as long as with myself, but I'm totally happy to exercise by myself. So I really did not feel at wit's end during the pandemic.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I would probably, regardless of what happens in my life later on, I would probably still consider myself single at heart because I just enjoy it so much. And I actually had a great time during the pandemic. Now that you mention it, I know it was probably not good for a lot of people, and I acknowledge that it was a very bad time for a lot of us. To
Uh-huh.
me, it was the best time. I
That sounds great.
I'm gonna be honest. It
Yeah,
was the best time I
yeah,
never had in my life.
yeah.
I just enjoy my simple routine. It was so good because when you were talking about your days, I was like, oh, I remember my pandemic days. I didn't get to see my friends as much, but I had a routine going on. I was still connecting with my friends socially, virtually. I mean, virtually, um, and just got a lot done. And I barely get anything done nowadays,
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I actually, sometimes I refer to that time, but I think that the key idea is just to really build and nurture that routine, because especially now it's kind of like you have to be a social butterfly sometimes because, you gotta go see friends and cater to all these different things, and that's fair enough, but I think it's kind of like we were trying to make up for that time by overcompensating and, going out quite a bit, and that's actually my struggle right now. Like, sometimes some days I'm like, "I just wanna be inside all day doing my things and then probably go for a walk once I'm done." And, nurturing that, like, sense of self again, because now that I go out a lot, it's kind of like, "Where's me?" Like, I don't see me anymore, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah, that's
important.
very interesting.
And
Yeah.
it's another example of how people can take anything that a single person enjoys and finds fulfilling and make it into something bad. So what I just described, people will say, "Oh, you're a single person who's set in your ways." And they say that like it's a bad thing. Well,
Yeah.
I kind of am. But the thing is, I also get to burst out of that anytime I want. So
Yeah.
it's like I have my routine because I like my routine, and it's fulfilling and it's calming and it's meaningful. But it's not like I couldn't do something else because every day I have the freedom to do something else. So if someone calls and wants to go out to dinner, or, a friend wants to come and visit, or, I will do that.
Yeah, I love that. And, thank you for sharing that with everyone. So now that we're approaching the end of the podcast, as I mentioned, we've got open mic, and I know you've got a beautiful message to share with everyone. So take it away, Bella.
Yes. So my message is simple. If you're single, live your single life fully, joyfully, and unapologetically.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful message to close with for this particular episode. It's been really fun talking about this topic. I'm not against couples or, love. I love
Uh,
love. I would
yeah.
like to say that. I'm just saying
Okay.
that it's just this topic is something that we don't talk about enough. Like, as much as we celebrate, romantic love and, couples and marriage, we should also celebrate singlehood and people that are embracing their singlehood. It's just as beautiful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.